Welcome back, football fans, to another thrilling season of college football. You're tuned into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and I'm Summer, ready to take you through all the excitement of this action-packed season. Can you feel it? The energy, the rivalries, it's electric. College campuses are alive, the stadiums are filling up, and the chase for the college football playoff starts right here, right now. Whether you're tailgating under the clear blue sky, flipping burgers on the grill with friends, or kicking back on the couch in your favorite jersey, we've got everything you need to feel like you're in the heart of the action. From game previews and key matchups to weather reports of teams flying under the radar, we're covering all the bases to keep you one step ahead. And hey, if this is your first time with us, welcome to the family. Here at Crunch Time Sports, we're all about giving you that extra edge, whether it's expert insight, hard-hitting stats, or just some serious college football vibes. So buckle up, because the season is going to be an absolute wild ride. Now let's not waste any more time. We've got a jam-packed show ahead, starting with the latest weather updates for the biggest games of the weekend. Let's dive in. There are some huge matchups on deck, so let's get right into it. First up, we have the 107th edition of the Backyard Brawl. The Pittsburgh Panthers will host the West Virginia Mountaineers in one of college football's oldest and most heated rivalries. This one's always a battle, and it's going to be a must-watch. Next, we're headed down to Florida, where the Seminoles will host the Memphis Tigers. Florida State is looking to start strong, but Memphis won't go down without a fight. Then we have the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders taking on the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers in the 74th edition of 100 Miles of Hate. This is one of those regional rivalries that flies under the radar nationally, but the intensity is undeniable. Moving on, the Oklahoma Sooners are hosting the Tulane Green Wave. Oklahoma is the favorite here, but Tulane has the potential to pull off an upset if the Sooners aren't careful. And finally, our game of the week, get ready for the 128th edition of the Civil War as the Oregon State Beavers host the Oregon Ducks. This one has huge implications for both teams, and the rivalry between these two schools always brings out the best, and sometimes the worst, in each side.
Thanks, Summer. Before we dive into the betting lines, let's take a quick look at the weather for this weekend's key games. All right, folks, before we dive into the matchups, let's take a look at the weather for some of the big games this weekend. First up, we've got Florida State hosting Memphis down in Tallahassee. Expected to be a scorcher at kickoff with temperatures around 90 degrees, partly sunny, and humid, classic Florida heat. So, expect those players to be sweating it out. Over in Pittsburgh, Pitt takes on West Virginia. Conditions are looking a bit more comfortable, with 83 degrees and plenty of sunshine. Perfect weather for some fall football in Steel City. Now, heading down south to Murfreesboro, where Western Kentucky faces off against Middle Tennessee State. It's shaping up to be a cooler game with 65 degrees, but it's going to be cloudy and humid, so don't let that temperature fool you. It's still going to feel sticky out there. In Norman, it's going to be hot when Oklahoma and Tulane hit the field. We're talking 97 degrees, partly sunny and sweltering. Hydration is going to be key for the players in this one. And finally, for those of you out west, Oregon and Oregon State are squaring off in Corvallis, where the weather will be a bit more forgiving, 74 degrees, partly sunny, and honestly, just a pleasant day for football. Lucky Ducks. So, whether you're dealing with the southern heat or those cooler northern breezes, it's shaping up to be a fun weekend of college football.
Thanks, Jessica. It's time to talk numbers, specifically the betting lines for this week. Whether you're looking to place a wager or just curious about how the odds makers are sizing up these matchups, we've got you covered. Let's dive into the lines for our key games this weekend. All right, now let's dive into the betting lines for some of these matchups, starting with that Florida State and Memphis game. FSU opened as a 6.5 point favorite at home, so odds makers are expecting them to have a decent edge, but it's not a huge spread. Next up, we've got Oklahoma as a 13.5 point favorite over Tulane. Playing in Norman, the Sooners have a solid cushion, and with that heat we mentioned earlier, they'll be looking to make quick work of Tulane. On the road, Western Kentucky opened as a 5.5 point favorite against Middle Tennessee State. Interesting spread here, especially with the Hilltoppers going into a tough environment in Murfreesboro. Could be a close one. Then, we've got West Virginia as a slight 2.5 point road favorite against Pitt. The odds makers are thinking this will be a close, gritty rivalry game. Expected to be a tight one in Pittsburgh. And finally, Oregon is heading into Corvallis as a very strong 16.5 point favorite against Oregon State. The Ducks are getting a lot of love from Vegas in this in-state battle, even on the road. So, whether you're looking at those close spreads or the bigger numbers, it's going to be interesting to see how these lines shift as we get closer to game time.
Thanks, Billy, and as always, shop for the best number. And now, folks, it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. We're bringing in the man, the myth, the legend, the voodoo child himself, Kenneth. When it comes to breaking down matchups, nobody does it better. So sit back, relax, and let Kenneth work his magic. Cue up a little Jimi Hendrix because it's time for the best breakdowns in the business. Kenneth, take it away.
Woo! Folks, as the sounds of the legendary Jimi Hendrix start to course through my veins, you know it's time for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network to get down to business. And we are absolutely here ready to rock and roll as we get ready to break down week 3 of the college football season. Everyone, buckle up because we got some fantastic games on the docket. And we're going to start right here in my beautiful backyard of Middle Tennessee as the Middle Tennessee State Blue Raiders welcome in the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers just 100 miles up the road there in beautiful Clarksville, Kentucky. So just a quick short trip across the state lines there. And what really intrigues me about this particular matchup is the fact that we're starting to get a little bit better data points on all of these teams in the college football season. Still got a long ways to go, but I think within the next 2 weeks, we'll start to have a lot more of that information crystallized. So let's start right here with the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. That offense has really struggled the first 2 weeks of the season, only averaging 15.5 points per game. That is absolutely not going to be able to get it done, especially if you have any hopes of playing for a conference championship or having really truly just a winning season here. So we how do I put this gently, if you will? This team, first week of the season, no question about it, struggled against Alabama, losing 63-0. Followed that back up with a game against Eastern Kentucky where they scored 31 points. So looked a little bit better on the offensive side. TJ Finley had a much better game there in week 2 against Eastern Kentucky, especially coming off of that difficult matchup against Alabama. In that game against Eastern Kentucky, Finley went 27 for 39, 351 yards, did have that one touchdown. His number one target there in that game, Keyshawn Johnson, 6'1" senior out of Birmingham, Alabama, had a big game there against Eastern Kentucky. 6 receptions, 119 yards, 19.8 yards per catch. That is definitely getting it done. 42-yard long reception there for that young man. They will be going up against Middle Tennessee State. MTSU also 1-1 on the season. They also got boat raced in their last game against Ole Miss. No shame in that. Did have a high scoring contest against in-state rival Tennessee Tech back in week 1, winning that contest 32-25. So let's spend a couple of minutes here with Western Kentucky and just kind of get an overarching view of where they are on the season. This team is really looking to put the ball in the air more so than what they are able to get on the ground. 227 yards through the air, only 79 yards per game on the ground. So if this team is going to have success, they're going to absolutely have to have success through the air, because from what we've seen, even in the two contests, they've really struggled to run the ball. They're averaging almost 40 pass attempts per game, only 26 rush attempts in those first two contests. Defense, we know that average is going to be a little bit lopsided given what they were able to give up against Alabama, but still, when you're averaging giving up 262 yards per game, that is definitely not encouraging. So let's take a look at what did they do against Eastern Kentucky on the ground. Well, Eastern Kentucky ran the ball 40 times for 190 yards in that contest. That does not bode well for this coming up matchup, especially when we look at MTSU, and you're talking about another team that has really struggled to run the ball as well. 230 yards passing, 73 yards rushing there for first-year head coach at MTSU, but no stranger to the Middle Tennessee area, as head coach Derek Mason was the head coach for Vanderbilt for a few years. Now, looking at MTSU's breakdown, almost 38 pass attempts per game, 29 rush attempts. So both teams are really going to look to put the ball in the air. That MTSU pass defense, next to last as far as giving up passing yards, almost 335 yards per game allowed. Looking back at Western Kentucky is only giving up 171 yards so far through the air. So this game is really going to come down to which team can actually have some semblance of a run game in this contest. Whoever is able to break that 80-yard threshold and really not turn the ball over should come out of this contest with a victory. Up next, another rivalry game, the Backyard Brawl, and you heard it in the lead-in. One of college football's oldest and most hotly contested rivalry games there, as we will be going to the city of Pittsburgh for this contest. Folks, the marketplace tells it all. This is going to be a very closely contested ball game here, as West Virginia comes in to this matchup 1-1. Losing the opener against West Virginia, losing at home against Penn State 34-12. Came back last week with a win over Albany 49-14. Pitt 2-0 on the season. Those wins, a blowout win of Kent State back in the opener, and a comeback win against Cincinnati last week as they were down for a majority of that ball game, was able to pull it out in the end 28-27. So when we look at this matchup, what is something that kind of stands out for us for the West Virginia offense under head coach Neal Brown? This is about as balanced of an offense as you're going to absolutely find. Almost 400 yards of total offense in the first two games, 205 yards through the air, 195 on the ground. As far as rushing attempts versus pass attempts, about 35 rush attempts per game, about 28 pass attempts per game. So, like I said, extremely balanced as far as their play distribution and their yards distribution. What cannot be said about West Virginia is this team does not play defense at all, giving up 24 points per game. But here's the number that would really concern me as a Pitt fan. 416 yards of total offense allowed per game, 113 in the early season, 271 through the air, 145 on the ground. So their opponents are feeling like they're at Burger King. They can literally have it their way. West Virginia's got to tighten up on the defensive side of the ball. And offensively, I think they're going to need to put up points in this ball game. Quarterback Garrett Green, 5'11" senior out of Tallahassee, Florida. Early returns on his season so far, struggled against Penn State, looked the part against Albany. But when we go back and look at that Penn State breakdown, 15 for 28, 161 yards, only 54% completion, 5.8 yards per attempt. For me, folks, that's not going to get it done. Let's take a look at Pitt as we really kind of start to get into this breakdown a little bit further. Pitt, explosive offense so far in the first two games, almost 42 points per game, 534 yards of total offense per game, 336 through the air, 199 on the ground, putting the ball in the air about 42 times per game, running the ball about 33 times per game. Their defense, a liability as well, giving up 331 yards of total offense to their opponents, 240 through the air, 91 on the ground. Their quarterback, Eli Hostin, freshman, 6'4", out of Zachary, Louisiana. First two games, okay, solid. We'll look at the Cincinnati game just a little bit more so than the Kent State game. Last week against Cincinnati, 20 for 35, 302 yards, only 57% completion, 8.6 yards per attempt, did have 3 touchdowns, did have the 1 INT. I think in this matchup, we're going to see whose offense will get slowed down in this contest. And honestly, folks, I truly believe this matchup is going to come down to which offense makes the critical mistake. And when I say mistake, I don't always mean a turnover. It could be you're right there on the cusp of being in field goal position. You take a penalty, take a sack that forces you out of field goal attempt position, and you're not able to come away with any points on that drive. Turnovers absolutely could be a factor. So whichever team makes those critical mistakes at critical moments in this ball game is really going to decide this contest. Because like I said, both teams absolutely horrendous on defense. Both offenses absolutely like to light up the skies. This is a game where if you're looking at over-unders as far as game totals, might be worth a quick peek in this contest. And because we like to give you as much information on these podcasts, that over-under sits at 64. Public thinks one way, sharps are looking at it another way in this matchup. We'll have more for you on the Saturday morning countdown to kickoff show about some of those breakdowns as far as the betting splits go. Our next contest, we head down to Tallahassee, Florida, and there are storylines galore in this matchup, starting with head coach Mike Norvell, former head coach of the Memphis Tigers, before taking the job down in Tallahassee. And speaking of that job in Tallahassee right now, boy, it is uncomfortable right now. Not only are they 0-2, on the season, but 0-2 in conference play. Not only are they 0-2 in conference play, but they have not looked good in either of those first two contests. But let's start with the Memphis side of the ledger. Memphis comes in 2-0. Looking at their opponents, a 40-point shutout in week 1 against North Alabama, followed up last week with a 38-17 win over Troy. When we look back at that game, 21-7 at the half, outscored Troy by looks like just a touchdown in the second half. So Troy was able to find a little bit of success there in the second half in that contest against. Memphis State was able to really hold out and get a win in this contest. So let's take a look at the job that head coach Ron Silverfield is doing there as the head coach of the Memphis Tigers. This offense putting up 39 points per game so far in the season, 370 yards of total offense, 235 through the air, 135 on the ground. We'll circle that 135 on the ground number here in just a minute. Because when we really just look at the game against Troy, we'll throw out the North Alabama game. Memphis absolutely got the job done on the ground. 29 rush attempts, 211 yards on the ground, 7.3 yards per carry. Everyone, I want you to circle those numbers right there. We'll absolutely circle back to that. Memphis throws the ball about 30 times per game, runs it about 28 times per game. So they're not going to shy away from sticking with the run if it's working early on in this contest against Florida State. The defense, now we gotta inflate some of these numbers a little bit, given the competition that they faced so far in the season. Memphis giving up 218 yards per game of total offense, 134 through the air, 80 on the ground. Like I said, we absolutely got to fluff those numbers up a little bit because given the competition that they face so far, absolutely not the most daunting schedule early on in the season. So with that being said, let's take a look at the Florida State side of the ledger because right now, head coach Mike Norvell and the Florida State Seminoles are taking on water to a very scary degree. As I mentioned, 0-2 on the season, losing in Dublin in week 0, 24-21 to Georgia Tech. Tech ran all over this Florida State defense. You thought you'd get a little bit better effort there when they came back home to face Boston College. We did not get that better effort. Boston College left Tallahassee with a win, 28-13. Let's take a look at the Florida State offense in these first two games. Only averaging 17 points per contest right now. That is not good. 292 yards of total offense. Folks, that's outside of the top 100. 233 passing right now, early on, but that's only good for 62nd in the country. Florida State cannot find any rush production at all, averaging less than 60 yards per game on the ground. And folks, here's the scariest part of that number. They're averaging 24 rush attempts. That's not good. As far as their passing attempts, 35 pass attempts per game. So they're either finding some chunk plays in the passing game or they're really struggling from a passing standpoint. Let's take a look at that Seminole defense because this was supposed to be their bread and butter. And that toast has been completely burned to a crisp early on in the season, allowing 26 points per game, barely within inside of the top 100. 353 yards per game of total offense. That's outside of the top 80. Now, you're going to be seduced by this number. Florida State's only allowing 126 yards per game through the air. You would be led to believe that they have a good pass defense. We have thoughts about that, and we do not share those thoughts with that sentiment. The reason why they're not giving up a lot of passing yards is because the opponents are running the ball to the left, to the right, and up the middle on this Florida State defense. 227 yards per game is what the Seminole defense is giving up. Why throw the ball when you can just run it straight down Florida State's throat? And boy, have their opponents absolutely been doing that early on in the season. My goodness, giving up 6 yards per play. So basically, folks, two plays, Florida State's defense is giving up a first down. That is not championship level football whatsoever. And the Noles, when you look at it, it's not like they've faced the greatest rushing attack so far in the season. So you're giving up, let's see if we can take a look at the numbers here. Georgia Tech ran it for 190 yards in that first game. Boston College, and credit their head coach, Bill O'Brien. Billy said, hold my beer, and they ran for 263. The breakdown for me is simple in this ball game. If the Memphis Tigers are able to surpass their season rush total of 135 in this contest, Mike Norvell is going to be in a world of trouble. Can't put it any other way than that. If Memphis gets to 150 on the ground in this contest and plays mistake-free football, no turnovers, no penalties that cost them an opportunity to put up points, man, it is going to be ugly in Tallahassee. I mean, just absolutely ugly in Tallahassee. So what is the key for Florida State? You want to say find a run game, but we're just not even going to go down that path. It's going to be on, can DJ find some easy throws early on in the game just to get some semblance of confidence in this matchup? Why isn't Florida State throwing to the tight end, throwing to the running back out of the backfield? Those are high percentage throws. We're not even worried about the big plays right now. What you got to do right now is get DJ confidence in this offense going, because when you look at his numbers throughout the first two games, a lot to be desired in both contests. You're looking at a quarterback that is 40 for 69, 465 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 INT. So truly, it's big play or bust here for DJ early on in the season. And I'm not putting all of this on DJ. I'm putting it on the offense and the head coaching to give him some really just easy completions. Let's pull up the last game against Boston College. And I just want to take a look at w- what what kind of offense are you trying to run here? All right, so against Boston College, he was 21 of 42, so right at 50%. 272, as I mentioned, 6.5 yards per pass attempt. Folks, that is, well, 2 yards off of just a minimum where a quarterback needs to be at in college. The one touchdown, one INT. We talked about it. They can't run the ball against anybody right now. In that game against Boston College, 16 carries for 21 yards. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 1.3 yards per rush attempt. Just not getting it done. So instead of trying to throw it deep at every opportunity and putting that defense back on the field, Florida State needs to sustain some drives in this ball game. 6, 8, 10 plays in a drive. Get that defense off the field so they can make some adjustments and maybe stop the bleeding as far as teams being able to run the ball. But I'm just going to count in this ball game how many receptions do the running backs and tight ends have in this contest. If that number is not over 12 in this contest, Florida State is going to struggle not only just to cover, not just to win this game, but if they have any chance of covering, Florida State is going to have to find some semblance of a run game and give DJ some very easy completions early on in this ball game. Up next, and this has been a game that I have been really excited about breaking down. The Tulane Green Wave traveled to Norman, Oklahoma to face the Oklahoma Sooners. And buckle in, folks, because we're going to spend some time with this matchup. Let's start with the Tulane Green Wave. And before I get into this matchup, our thoughts and prayers are with everybody there on the Gulf Coast as they are preparing for potential landfall of a hurricane here in the next day or so. We pray that, first of all, that hurricane doesn't make land, but if it does, that the damage is minimum and loss of life is absolutely none. That area is still reeling all of these years later after Hurricane Katrina, and our thoughts and prayers are with all of you, Louisiana, Mississippi, and as that hurricane could make its way even deeper inland. So please stay safe and God bless you from all of us here. Not an easy way to segue, but as we say here, college football is a family, and you all are a part of our family. So definitely wanted to make sure that we mentioned that before we got into the contest. So Tulane comes into this matchup 1-1. Blowout win in week 1 against Southeastern Louisiana, 52-0 there. Hard fought loss last week against Kansas State. Really a lot of mistakes really cost Tulane in that ball game. Losing to Kansas State 34-27. Were absolutely in a position to win that ball game. Basically, that game turned in the fourth quarter with about 8 minutes left to go. Tulane fumbled. Kansas State takes it back 60 yards, and that was the deciding score in that contest. So we got time, so we don't have to rush through this matchup. Like I said, this was a matchup that I really liked. So let's take a look at just what Tulane did against a really quality Power 4 team, what did they do well against Kansas State, and where do they absolutely need to tighten up a little bit against Oklahoma in this contest? Let's start with the positive. Really good on third down. 5 out of 13 on offense. Excellent defense on third down. Kansas State was only 2 for 10 in that contest. Keep that stat circled in your inner thoughts there. What are some other positives? Quarterback had a fantastic game against Kansas State. 19 for 29, 342 yards passing. Folks, listen to this, 11.8 yards per pass attempt. For context, that's kind of like Jaden Daniels, what he was putting up last year en route to a Heisman Trophy there for LSU. Now, did have the one pick, but that's okay. We'll continue with the good stuff here. Tulane, 37 rush attempts against Kansas State, 149 yards of rush offense, 4 yards per rush attempt. That we can absolutely we can roll with that. We'll ride the wave with that, if you will. Now, gotta talk about the negatives here. The 2 turnovers were absolutely costly. Don't have those 2 turnovers. Tulane is sitting with a 2-0 record right now. The penalties. Cannot have 9 penalties for 80 yards in this contest against Oklahoma, especially with that game being on the road. Can't have that. Got to play much better rush defense. Kansas State last week, 33 rush attempts, 215 yards, 6.5 yards per rush attempt is what the Wildcats had in that contest. Pass defense, need to clean it up a little bit, but 15 for 23, 181 yards, 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Those are all respectable numbers there. Now, let's take a look at the job that head coach John Summerall is doing there as the head coach of Tulane. This offense, as I talked about, averaging 40 points per game, 482 yards per game of total offense, 287 through the air, 195 on the ground. Folks, this team likes to line it up and play some smash mouth offense here. 38 rush attempts per game. And like I said, that's not just them padding the stats against Southeastern Louisiana. That's doing a really great job of rush offense against Kansas State. As I mentioned, going for 149 against K-State. So that balances out extremely well there for Tulane. 23 pass attempts per game. So they're not afraid to throw it. But if they can run the ball at you, they will absolutely eat up the clock, shorten the game, and look to play complementary football. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, we have a few concerns here. When your defense is allowing 160 yards of rushing offense per game, that's something that we got to take notice of. Now, the pass defense, we talked about it. Solid against K-State, only giving up on average 140 yards per game through the air. So just for a quick refresher there, K-State only threw it for 181 yards against this Tulane defense. So that's not bad. And only right around 300 yards of total offense. Okay, we can work with that. It's the 17 points per game that we like. Now, we know Kansas State doubled that, going for 34. So where does this game need to be played at? We got to count the number of possessions in this ball game. If the number of possessions kind of like what we saw back in week 0 with Georgia Tech and Florida State. If Tulane can keep the number of possessions in this ball game to around 8, that favors Tulane in this contest. If it gets 9, 10, and 11, you're giving Oklahoma more possessions, more opportunity to score. That's not beneficial there for Tulane. Now, let's flip it over and take a look at this Oklahoma team led by head coach Brent Venables. And when we look at this Oklahoma Sooner offense, and we're going to look at their production in their first 2 games. They're 2-0 on the season. Blowout win against Temple in week 1, 51-3. We're going to come back to that ball game here in just a minute. Last weekend against Houston. That's right, the Houston Cougars. Not a team that we've been extremely high on. Oklahoma barely gets out of that game alive, 16-12. I said we would go back to that Temple game, so let's do that right now. Against Temple, and I said, don't be seduced by that 51-3 score. Oklahoma was 1 for 13 on third downs in that game against Temple. Temple had 6 turnovers in that ball game. Oklahoma passing offense struggled in that game. 19 for 29, 158 yards passing, 5.4 yards per pass attempt. I told you, don't be seduced by those numbers. You got to dig deeper. Let's take a look at what they did last week against Houston. Again, struggle on third down. 4 for 14 against Houston. Passing offense again struggled. 19 for 32, 174 yards of passing offense, 5.4 yards per pass attempt. Oklahoma could not run the ball. Can't believe I'm saying this about an Oklahoma team could not run the ball. Last week, 29 rush attempts, 75 rushing yards. That's for the entire game, folks. That's not a drive. That's one game worth of production. 2.6 yards per rush attempt. Folks, Houston had 2 turnovers in that game. That's the difference between Oklahoma being 1-1 and escaping and having 2 wins. Oklahoma's offense, 34 points per game. We're going to round it up. 314 yards per game of total offense. That's not what we've seen from the Oklahoma Sooners over the past few years. 166 through the air. 148 on the ground. Boomer Sooner not booming. Mama Deb, Cheryl, Jen, the rest of all of my Oklahoma fans, I want you to listen to this very carefully. This is not the Oklahoma Sooners that you have gotten accustomed to over the past few years. Changing offensive coordinators, Jeff Lebby goes to Mississippi State as the head coach. This offense is really struggling. We talked about this offensive line for Oklahoma not being a unit that has gelled yet. We are seeing that in spades so far. Now, what we are seeing is the Oklahoma defense being legit. 194 yards passing. We'll see how Tulane matches up with that. But this rush defense for Oklahoma, it so far, competition with notwithstanding, but only 64 yards per game rushing is something that we'll definitely keep an eye on in this matchup. What are the keys in this ball game? Key for Oklahoma, figure out what the problem is with your passing game. Get your young quarterback some confidence because Jackson Arnold is not looking comfortable back there in the pocket. The numbers, like I said, a little bit deceiving, especially because they rolled up so many touchdowns in that first game. Did it on a lot of short fields. Arnold, 36 for 57, 315 yards in the first 2 games combined. 6 touchdowns, 1 INT. For Tulane, freshman quarterback out of California, Darren Mensah. On the season so far, this young man, 29 of 41, 547 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 1 INT. Whichever quarterback is able to stay clean in the pocket, that team may come out of Norman, Oklahoma with the win. I'm going to give you a player to watch here for the Tulane Green Wave. Mario Williams. Where's number 4? 5'9", 180-pound junior out of Tampa, Florida. On the season so far, 10 receptions, 252 yards, 25.2 yards per reception. And folks, he's not just a intermediate threat. He can shake loose and get vertical. Already has 2 big receptions over 45 yards. Got a 68-yard reception in week 1 against Southeast Louisiana. You said, okay, step up in competition. Last week, 6 receptions, 128 yards, 21.3 yards per catch, along of 47. If he can get behind this Oklahoma Sooner secondary, and there are some gaps back there in that secondary, if he's able to get loose, watch out. Tulane could not only just cover, Tulane could pull off a shocker. And now, the moment that we've been waiting to get to. Our good friends over at 850 The Ticket, our good friend Matlock and his lovely co-host Julie Vols, pardon me as I got a little bit choked up there. They picked our game of the week this week. So I know you may not see it on the podcast, but on the YouTube and Twitter show when we're streaming it, you will see their graphic there. As you know, Julie Vols, she's a Tennessee fan. Matlock being an Auburn Tiger fan. We have just a cute animation of those 2 mascots pulling a chain with a lock on it. So this is the Matlock and Julie Vols balls to the wall game of the week. So let's not waste any time and let's get into this matchup with the Oregon Ducks traveling to Corvallis to take on in-state rival, the Oregon State Beavers. Both teams come in 2-0 in this contest. And folks, the storylines behind the scenes cannot be ignored. College football is a game of emotions, and oftentimes I get really stuck in the data and sometimes loses fact that, this is an emotionally charged game. So Oregon, along with USC, UCLA, and Washington, they go to the Big Ten, breaking up the Pac-12, leaving behind Oregon State and Washington State to fend for themselves. That is going to play a part in this contest. Let's start with the Oregon Ducks in this contest. And our good friend Meg, a big Oregon Duck fan, her and her beautiful daughter, hopefully they're checking out this podcast. The Ducks, 2-0 on the season, as I mentioned, struggled against Idaho in week 1, winning that contest 24-14. Really struggled last week against Boise State, winning that contest 37-34. Where has the struggle been for Dan Lanning and this Oregon Duck team? Well, it has been with the offensive line. This offensive line has yet to gel, and you can see it in Dylan Gabriel's passing numbers so far on the season. Gabriel, in 2 games, 2 games, 18 for I'm sorry. Let me back up and give those numbers. In 2 games, 59 of 70, 623 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's not finding those big pass plays down the field because that offensive line's really not giving him the time like Bo Nix had last year. Jordan James, the fantastic running back out of my backyard here in Nashville. Junior, 5'10", 210 pounds. He's off to a fantastic start. 32 carries, 197 yards, 6.2 yards per carry, 1 touchdown. But here's the problem with Oregon. They have not found that number 2 running back. As I said, they needed to find this season. Really struggling in that area. Let's take a look at the wide receivers. Before I move on, let me single out their number 2 running back, Noah Whittington, 5'8", 200-pound junior out of Fort Valley, Georgia. 20 carries, 54 yards. So he's going to absolutely have to step up, or somebody else is going to have to step up and really take some of the pressure off of James there out of the backfield. As far as the wide receivers go, Gabriel's able to spread the ball around, but we're not seeing big time production, as that was something that one of the things that we looked for in the offseason. Not one wide receiver is over 16 yards per reception yet. Evan Stewart just barely missing that, but 8 receptions, 127 yards. Folks, we're getting close to pressure busting pipes here with the Oregon Duck passing game. If they're not able to really start getting this passing game elevated and that offensive line solidified, all the hopes and aspirations that this team has had in the offseason will quickly disappear. So, passing game, fantastic. 311 yards per game, 108 through the air. But the defense is really alarming, and we're going to circle that for Oregon State here. 158 yards through the air is what the Ducks are giving up, but 135 on the ground. Let's spend the last remaining minutes talking about this Oregon State rushing attack under new head coach Trent Bray. Not familiar with Coach Bray's history, but if you look at it, he loves to run the ball. When we look at what Oregon State has done in the first 2 contests, over 50 rush attempts in both contests. Yes, in week 1 against Idaho State, you would expect that. Against San Diego State, a little bit better opponent there, but not great. Still over 54 rush attempts in this contest. Matlock, Julie Vols, listen to this number here. 54.5 rush attempts per game. That's 4th best in the country. 300 yards per game on the ground. That's something we used to see from the service academies when they were running the triple option, where it wasn't a whole lot of pass, but it was a whole lot of run. 300 yards per rush in this contest would get Oregon State to the window, not just with the cover, but with the win outright. Almost 30 points per game. Let's go ahead and just give it out right here. This is our best bet of the weekend. Oregon State, a 16.5 point underdog in this contest. If Oregon State is able to run the ball against the Ducks, and I don't need them to go for 300 yards. If Oregon State gets to 200 yards rushing in this game, that means that Oregon offense is sitting on the sideline burning fuel because they're not on the field. Oregon State covers this game. So we're going to take the Oregon State Beavers to cover. We love it more at 17. If that number ticks up, that's a super buy for us. We're not afraid to take it at 16.5. So with a best bet of 16.5, we're going to take the Oregon State Beavers to cover that line there in the Civil War. We talked about it. The emotions of this contest, Oregon State feeling left behind by their in-state rival, not having this game on the road. If this game was in Eugene, might feel a little bit differently in this contest. But because this game is in Corvallis, it's on national television. We've seen the Oregon Ducks absolutely struggle. So if Oregon State can get any semblance of a pass rush going, and when you look at the Beavers defense in this contest, they're only giving up 168 yards per game through the air. Now, let's quickly go back to the Ducks. Ducks are getting 311 yards passing per game. So, if I'm Oregon State, especially if James is off the field, I am dropping 7 into coverage. I'm not trying to blitz Dylan Gabriel. I'm going to make him nickel and dime us down the field and force Oregon to be in a 8, 10, 11 play drive just to try to score points. Because if I'm not giving up big plays, I'm not worried about the yards. I'm worried about the number of possessions in this contest. And if Oregon is having to kick field goals instead of touchdowns, that will absolutely allow for Oregon State to continue to run the ball and not be behind the scoreboard in this contest, especially if Oregon State is able to get a lead in the first half. That will absolutely put all the pressure on Dan Lanning and this Oregon offense to really kind of get out of symmetry and put the ball in the air even more. Talked about their pass attempts in the game, 35 pass attempts per game. You really want to force Oregon, especially with that offensive line struggling the way that they've struggled so far, to really get that number to about 45 pass attempts per game, really abandoning the run and being one-dimensional if you're Oregon State. I think it's going to be a fantastic college football weekend. We may not have the greatest of slates, but there's always opportunities to get to the window, as the late, great Gordon Soley, wrestling announcer from many, many years ago, would say. We're just trying to get you to the pay window each and every week. Folks, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network in the first 2 weeks, 29, 10, and 1. Great ROI. It's not too late to get on board with us with the Crunch Time Express. Start cashing more of those tickets than what you may have done so far. If you have any questions, please reach out to us by email at contact@crunchtimesportsadvantage.com or DM us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP. On behalf of my amazing team that does a great job each and every week, the lovely Miss Summer, Miss Jessica, our 2 beautiful co-hosts, our senior handicapping analyst, Billy, who gets it done for us each and every week. This is Kenneth, senior analyst for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage, signing off. Have a great week 3 of your college football weekend. Stay safe. God bless. And as our nation remembers the brutal attacks from 23 years ago on September 11th, our prayers are with our entire nation. May we continue to heal, love each other, and just be better humans. God bless everybody.